He never expected the truth to come from his own son. A devoted Christian father, raised with fear and suspicion about Islam, always warned his family to stay away from Muslims. To him, they were different, too different. Stories he had heard growing up, things he had seen on the news, and the voices around him had shaped his heart with doubt. So, when a mosque opened just 2 blocks away, his discomfort turned into obsession. He feared what was being taught inside, who went there, and what his neighborhood might become. And instead of approaching with curiosity, he chose fear. He sent his teenage son not with hate, but with a mission. Observe them, note what they say, what they do, and what kind of people they are. His son was hesitant but curious. He didn't carry the same weight of prejudice as his father, but he respected him and agreed. So one Friday afternoon, he entered the mosque for the first time. Nervous, unsure, and expecting cold stares, he was instead greeted with smiles and warmth. Someone offered him water. Another showed him where to sit. The imam noticed him and kindly said, "Welcome. You're our guest today." Confused by the hospitality, the boy watched silently. He saw Muslims standing shoulder to shoulder, bowing and prostrating, not in chaos, but in unity. No one looked angry. No one spoke of hate. There was no shouting, no secret plotting, just sincere prayer, humility, and a sense of peace he couldn't explain. After prayer, several people came up to him, assuming he was new to Islam or just curious. Instead of pushing anything on him, they asked if he had questions, if he was okay, and if he wanted food. He didn't know how to respond. All the warnings, all the assumptions he carried, they started melting. He saw families, children playing, old men praying quietly, youth talking about school and kindness. Where was the darkness he was sent to uncover? Where was the hate his father feared? It didn't exist. There was only light. When he came home, his father asked, "What did you see?" The boy sat quietly for a moment, then said, "They were nothing like what you said, Dad. They were kind, peaceful, and they even prayed for people who don't believe like them." His father stared at him in silence. The walls in his heart, built over years, suddenly cracked. What his son brought home wasn't just a report. It was truth. A truth that was waiting to be seen, not with suspicious eyes, but with an open heart. That one visit sparked conversations, and those conversations led to understanding. And from there, something even greater happened. But that's a story for the next part. The father had grown up in a world where Muslims were often shown in a negative light. Every headline, every movie scene, every political speech seemed to reinforce the idea that Islam was foreign, threatening, and dangerous. He had never met a Muslim personally, but he was convinced he knew who they were. So when a mosque was built near his neighborhood, his unease turned into quiet fear. He didn't want to protest publicly, but inside he couldn't help but feel suspicious. One day, he asked his teenage son to go check it out, not to cause trouble, but just to observe and report back. He wanted to know what was going on inside those walls. The son, although unsure, agreed. He wasn't filled with the same fear. He was curious. He walked in on a Friday during the congregational prayer, expecting silence or maybe stares, but what greeted him was something entirely different. People welcomed him, smiled, offered him a place to sit. He watched as men lined up in prayer, all standing shoulder to shoulder, without barriers. Rich and poor, young and old, all equal. He heard the words of the imam speaking about peace, mercy, and helping neighbors, no matter their religion. There was no hate, no division, only sincerity. After the prayer, he was offered food, water, and even asked if he needed help with anything. No one pressured him, no one interrogated him. They simply showed him kindness. That night, he returned home with his heart stirred. When his father asked what he saw, he quietly said, "They're nothing like what we thought. They're actually some of the kindest people I've met." For the first time in years, the father was silent. His son's experience began to plant a seed in his heart. Doubt turned into reflection, and reflection slowly gave birth to understanding. It wasn't the son's words alone, it was the truth in them, glowing from a place of first-hand witness. What began as spying out of fear became the first step in a family's journey toward breaking prejudice, seeing the light of Islam with new eyes. The son couldn't shake off what he experienced inside the mosque. He had expected tension, maybe even coldness, but instead he found peace, something he hadn't even realized he was missing. The simplicity of the prayer, the humility in the posture, the unity among the people, it all touched something deep inside him. These weren't people plotting in secret or spreading hatred. They were just ordinary human beings seeking closeness to God, serving others, and trying to live in peace. The warmth of the community, the discipline of the prayer, and the powerful silence during worship stayed with him long after he left. It made him think about how easily we judge what we do not know. At school, he started researching Islam not to convert but to understand what he had seen. And the more he read, the more intrigued he became. The teachings of honesty, respect for parents, caring for neighbors, and standing for justice all reflected values his own family believed in. But Islam emphasized them so clearly, so strongly. He even found verses and sayings about respecting Christians and Jews, about honoring Jesus and Mary, things his father had never imagined Islam taught. As he learned, he also started noticing something else. His own community had always taught love, but often practiced judgment. In contrast, the Muslims he met practiced love even before saying a word about it. They lived their values instead of only preaching them. This contrast opened his heart even more. He realized that truth doesn't always come wrapped in the label we expect. It often comes in actions, in small gestures of sincerity. He began visiting the mosque more often, this time with no fear, no task, no assignment, just a heart open to witnessing what was real. And every time he returned, he found more kindness, more truth, more peace. It wasn't a religion of violence. It was a path of clarity, connection, and deep spiritual beauty. He hadn't accepted Islam yet, but something inside him had already changed. The walls were falling, the questions were rising, and truth was beginning to settle in his soul. The father noticed something had shifted in his son. He was calmer, more thoughtful, and even more respectful at home. It wasn't rebellion or distance, it was growth. Curious but still skeptical, the father finally asked, "What's really going on with you? Are you getting involved in something I should worry about?" The son looked at him with calm eyes and said, "No, Dad, I'm just finally seeing people for who they are, not who we were told they were." That sentence hung in the air. It wasn't confrontational, but it pierced deep. The father had spent years forming opinions based on fear, but now those beliefs were being challenged, not by strangers, but by his own child. Instead of getting defensive, the father stayed quiet. Over the next few days, he started to listen more when his son spoke about the people at the mosque. He heard about how they cared for the poor, how they gave charity, how they spent their nights praying not just for themselves, but for a peace in the world. Slowly, the father's fear began to shift into curiosity. One evening, his son shared a passage from the Quran that talked about honoring all prophets, including Jesus. It stunned the father. He had always believed Muslims rejected Jesus, but now he saw that Islam didn't deny him, it respected him deeply. The turning point came when his son invited him to a mosque open house. Hesitant but open-minded, the father went, not to agree but to observe. What he found was not a secretive gathering, but a welcoming community. People smiled at him, offered him tea, showed him around. The imam didn't preach hate. Instead, he spoke about kindness to neighbors, forgiveness, and standing up for justice. The father felt disarmed. The stereotypes began to crumble. The seed of truth, planted by his son, was now starting to grow inside his own heart. It wasn't a dramatic conversion or an overnight change, but it was the beginning of healing. The man who once sent his son to spy was now seeing things clearly for the first time. And it all started with love, honesty, and the courage to face truth, even when it came from his own child. Days turned into weeks, and the father found himself thinking more and more about what he had witnessed at the mosque. The warmth, the humility, and above all, the sincere respect for all faiths had left a mark. He had lived a life surrounded by one version of the truth, but now that truth felt incomplete. He didn't suddenly abandon his beliefs, but something inside him was softening. One evening, while sitting quietly with his son, he asked, "Why did they treat me so kindly, knowing how I felt about them?" The son smiled gently and replied, "Because they follow a prophet who taught them to respond to hate with mercy and fear with kindness." That answer stayed with the father. He began reading more on his own, starting with verses from the Quran that spoke about justice, love, and humanity. He was surprised to see how much Islam honored previous prophets, how it encouraged dialogue, respect, and understanding between people of different beliefs. The Quran didn't feel like a book of division. It felt like a book calling people back to the oneness of God and the oneness of humanity. He started to see how Muslims around the world were misrepresented, reduced to labels, and misunderstood through headlines. But the people he met at the mosque, their character, their compassion, spoke louder than any media ever could. The father didn't convert that night, but he did something more powerful. He changed his heart. He began to tell others in his own community that what he thought he knew was wrong. He began defending the very people he once feared. He shared the story of how his son helped him see clearly, not through debate, but through experience. He realized that real understanding doesn't come from books or broadcasts alone. It comes from human connection. That's how bridges are built. That's how hearts are healed. In the journey of a father and son, what began as a mission of mistrust became a lesson in love. And in that lesson, both found something greater than what they were looking for: truth, compassion, and the courage to grow beyond fear. The son's journey into the mosque had started as a mission, but it soon became a mirror. He saw his own assumptions dissolve in the warmth of the people, and now he was watching the same transformation happen in his father. What once seemed impossible, a man so firm in his beliefs, now sitting with Muslims, asking questions with respect, was now their new reality. The father had always considered his faith unshakable, and in many ways it still was. But now, for the first time, he wasn't seeing Islam as a threat to his religion. He was seeing it as a reflection of shared values. He recognized teachings about mercy, justice, love for the poor, and honoring parents. They weren't foreign anymore. They were familiar, like an echo of what he already knew. As his understanding deepened, his heart softened. He noticed how Islam didn't demand hatred of others to strengthen itself. Instead, it asked for humility, sincerity, and respect. One day he told his son, "I used to think they were trying to change the world, but now I see they're trying to make the world better, just like us." It was a powerful realization. He had once viewed Muslims as outsiders, as people to be watched. But now, he saw them as neighbors, even friends. He saw them as people walking a path of purpose just as he was. The father began reading more, watching lectures, listening to Muslims share their experiences. He didn't agree with everything. He didn't need to. But what mattered most is that he finally saw them with clear eyes. The walls of fear had collapsed. What remained was space. Space for respect, for dialogue, for truth to breathe. He told his son, "You didn't just change my opinion, you helped me grow." This story isn't about conversion, it's about connection. A father learned from his son, and a son led with example, not argument. The mosque that once sparked suspicion became the door to understanding. In a world that teaches us to fear what we don't know, this family discovered something powerful. That when hearts open, truth walks in gently, and what once seemed impossible becomes a beautiful beginning. One quiet afternoon, the father stood outside the same mosque he once feared. He wasn't there to spy or doubt, he was simply waiting for his son, who now regularly attended events there. As he watched families walk in, children laughing, elders greeting each other with warmth, something inside him settled. This place, once a mystery wrapped in fear, had become familiar. It had become safe, and more than that, it had become a place where he saw the reflection of faith in its purest form. The journey that began with suspicion had led him to a place of unexpected peace. His son walked out, smiling. They sat on a bench nearby, just watching people leave after prayer. The father broke the silence and said, "You know, I used to think that strength meant holding tightly to your own beliefs and never listening to others. But now I think real strength is being brave enough to learn, to listen, and to admit when you were wrong." His son nodded, quietly proud of the man sitting next to him. The young boy who was once sent on a mission had returned not just with a message, but with transformation. The father didn't just change how he viewed Muslims, he changed how he viewed the world. He now knew that truth didn't belong to one group or one building. It was scattered like light, waiting to be seen by anyone who opened their eyes. He didn't stop being Christian, but he became more loving, more compassionate, and more open. Everything faith is supposed to inspire. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't come from the people inside the mosque, but from those who were once afraid to enter it. This father's journey reminds us that the heart is capable of great change, no matter how old or stubborn it may be. His son didn't argue, he didn't lecture, he just witnessed truth, lived it, and shared it. And in doing so, he helped open a door that fear had kept shut for years. The walls of misunderstanding fall, not through force, but through kindness. And sometimes, all it takes is a son who dared to see for himself, and a father willing to listen. What began as a simple task, a father asking his son to investigate what was happening inside a mosque, turned into a journey that neither of them could have imagined. It wasn't just about Islam, it was about unlearning fear, breaking down walls of misunderstanding, and rediscovering humanity. The boy entered that mosque with silent questions and walked out carrying undeniable truth, not through books or debates, but through experience, warmth, and sincerity. And that truth found its way into his father's heart, quietly and powerfully. This story teaches us that real change doesn't always come through force or confrontation. Sometimes it starts with one honest visit, one open heart, or one moment of courage to step beyond our comfort zone. The father didn't lose his identity. He gained perspective. He saw that people who worshiped differently weren't enemies. They were fellow seekers of peace, justice, and connection with God. And in that realization, both father and son grew, not apart, but closer to each other and to truth. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes all it takes to change a mind is to tell a story from the heart. Stay curious, stay open, and keep seeking the truth wherever it may lead.